Welcome back. We're just going to go right into part 2 of this podcast with Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib. If you didn't listen to part 1 yesterday, you might want to do that because it gives you some really important background for the very difficult topics we touch on today. And we start with October 7th. Let's do it. Tell us your October 7th story, because I always ask that because, of course, each story is unique and always so moving. When did you find out? Where were you? And did you realize right away, pardon my French, but oh shit, this is different?
Precisely. I was in California at the time. It was Friday night in California. I lived in California in the San Francisco Bay Area for many, many years. And I worked for a philanthropic organization working in Africa with global health and poverty alleviation issues. It was Friday night after a long run and walk. And when I came back to my place, I started seeing notifications about Israeli bombardment throughout the Gaza Strip, and I was very confused. I was immensely concerned, but confused that this was just a false alarm. And then when I got home and I started looking at social media and seeing what was happening, it was about 10 p.m. And I saw what was going on. And again, confusion. But I would say it took me about 10 minutes to register what was really happening once I started seeing social media, Al Jazeera Arabic, other Arabic sources. And there was a kind of like a brief moment of silence and shock after the realization hit me. And I said this in a short film that is coming out about my efforts and my work, and I screamed into the void, knowing what was about to happen to my family and to Gaza and to the entirety of our peoples. I'd been tracking different issues and different threads before October 7th. I had been concerned that Hamas may attempt something foolish. Nothing at all on this scale, but the massive protests against the group's rule in Gaza, the prospect of Saudi-Israeli normalization and their attempts to derail it, the rumors that the Qataris were possibly thinking about cutting off funding to Hamas. Unfortunately, Netanyahu and his policies are central to the entrenchment of Hamas in the Gaza Strip as part of a nefarious 3D chess game to keep the Palestinians divided and to, use them as a way to sabotage the two-state solution.
I just have to interject and reassure you that has been covered extensively in the podcast, as well as a huge part of that, as you and I both know, is what's called the conceptia in Hebrew, but the containment strategy in English, which is all about let the money flow, that'll keep them happy, let the Palestinian workers in, create a false sense of status quo, satisfaction, contentment. Except that Netanyahu actually believed he'd achieved that.
Precisely that. And again, like one of the spins on the containment strategy, just to digress for a second, is that it was meant to help the Palestinian civilians and the people in Gaza, which I am personally of the opinion that really was not the original. It was genuinely an attempt to ensure that Hamas basically becomes entrenched in a long-term Cuba-like situation where, yes, you're right, a status quo that is a state of no war and no peace. But so I was horrified, and I started talking to family members, and I reached out, and I was trying to understand what was happening, and once I saw the number of casualties, 50, then 100, then 200, then 300, and I just remember just feeling like paralyzed. And again, to be clear, I was horrified once I started seeing images of hostages being dragged into Gaza and women and elderly being brought into Gaza. But I must say that I felt a sense of like physical paralysis during which I do a lot of contemplative mindfulness, personal work, and I just pictured the future and what was ahead for Gaza, and I knew that Gaza as we knew it would cease to exist.
You must also have been shocked, as were most people, by the complete absence of the IDF.
Well, that's that like hours, like 8 hours of just them going in and out. Like, are you kidding me? I just, and then I was trying to read analysis of like where is the Israeli military? Like, and then, but I will tell you, and this is something that I used to say all the time. I remember vividly in Arabic because I speak Arabic. Arabic is my native tongue. I was looking at Arabic Palestinian social media on everybody in Gaza is on Facebook. I was looking on Facebook and on Twitter, and I remember so vividly how, like, I saw probably, like, I mean, I saw hundreds of posts, but I saw, like, up close, I read like 70 to 80 anti-Hamas posts that said, "What the hell do you think you just did?" It was more like, "What the fuck did you just do? You just literally announced like this is like our the end of us, essentially." And so I say this because unfortunately, yes, there were these scenes of people participating in October 7th or celebrating, and we're still talking about a few thousand, but the people who participated, I mean, we're talking about a place with 40% general unemployment, 70% youth unemployment. Something like 70 to 80% of the people of Gaza have never left the Gaza Strip. Over 50% of the population are under the age of 18. A trapped population that has only known 8 hours of electricity at a time. This is what happens when all of a sudden you have not just one hole, but multiple holes in the security perimeter all around the Gaza Strip that opened up. It was like for many, it was like a picnic. It was like a day trip. And they were like, oh my God, let's go and they just thought, okay, this is gonna be a little attack and then there'll be a ceasefire. And then, and also the other unfortunate thing is that so many people in Gaza itself didn't they've never met Jews or Israelis outside of the just seeing soldiers or seeing them as part of the occupation or part of the problem or thinking of them as part of, they've only met Jews and Israelis through Al Jazeera or
Right.
through a context of war and of course through Hamas's incitement. So I'm not at all trying to diminish the horror of what took place with with the civilian part of it, either
Right.
going into Israel or the shameful scenes of dragging bodies in Gaza and the people that participated in it, which is still statistically a small number of people. I'm just saying that it's a repressed population that is unemployed, that has not seen Israelis, that has been conditioned to not view Israelis as human beings, and that's what happened. And Hamas were ultimately the responsible parties for the broad conditioning of Gaza, for creating an environment where Gaza is the isolated hellhole for a lot of these people. And once there was just a small opening, some people acted in the way they did, like animals. But that is the result of the environment rather than something so exceptionally unique to Gazans and their love for Hamas. So why do I make a point of doing that? Because there's then this belief that we can never, ever, 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 under any circumstance, ever have peace and coexistence with Gazans again. To which I genuinely believe that is not the case. People's attitudes, people's opinions, look at me, for example. Like, people are a product of their environment. People's attitudes and views are elastic, they're not static. They are subject to change based on a lot of inputs that then can influence the outputs. And I actually say this in hopes that people don't lose sight of the fact that people in Gaza are just as capable of really living in a new reality in which there is peace with Israel and there is coexistence, and they're not going to carry out another October 7th attack.
Well, let's hope so, because that supposition is going to be put to the test soon. But I don't want to dwell on this comment I'm about to make, but I have to make it. Um, because what you've just explained in terms of your understanding, interpretation of what happened on October 7th, particularly with civilians, and why is fascinating. What I found possibly even more distressing, I happened to be in Toronto on October 7th at the end of a annual summer holiday. What to me was just gutting was what happened in the streets of Toronto and other cities in the West and the States, all over Europe. But Toronto was and remains one of the worst. Canada now has the distinction of being like the most anti-Semitic country in the West, and it's horrible. It really has changed dramatically since October 7th. But on that afternoon, on October 7th in the afternoon, as the slaughter was still ongoing, there were street celebrations. There were parties in the streets. And I just I'm not even gonna try, and I'm not gonna ask you to explain that.
No, I will. So remember what I said about Palestinians in the land versus Palestinians in the diaspora. That explanation that I shared earlier is hyper focused and specific to the people of Gaza. Part of why I decided to come forth, part of why I left an otherwise very fulfilling and very good life that I had, doing good work, comfortable life, quiet, out of the public eye in California, in San Francisco, right by the beach, is what you just described. That is, to me, what is unforgivable is the behavior of people in the diaspora. I was so, and by the way, I'm on record as having said this dozens and dozens of times, but let me restate it. As part of my October 7th story, which now we're going to go beyond the first initial phase of it. So we're going to go into day 2. I was horrified by the celebration of the taking of women and children and the elderly as hostages, um, and having that be labeled an act of resistance. I was horrified that Hamas, for the first time, I think in my lifetime, was enjoying mainstream levels of support in ways that I have never seen before. I was genuinely confused as to why people wouldn't. I thought surely people would want to separate Hamas from Gazans. People would say, hey, Hamas, wait a minute. At minimum, fine. Like, not, I mean, not fine, but like, I thought at minimum, they'd be like, all the children, all the women, all the elderly, non negotiable. This is disgusting. Yalla, let them out. Hamas, no, this is unacceptable. Immediately. And then people were like, well, what about the Palestinian hostages? Well, what about this? And what about that? And what about 60? And I was like, the dehumanization of victims of October 7th, people calling the Israelis in the kibbutzim all around the strip settlers. When, and you should go back 10 days ago, I put out a post about my dad, who passed away 5 years ago, and how he was assisted by folks in the kibbutzim. People who Vivian Silver, some of the most are like diehard leftist pro peace Israelis who helped Palestinians, who helped organize marches for peace. Then October 7th was gonna finish them off. And so I like that all hit me. And again, it wasn't that there are two strains to that. There's like just from a human decency and just like a morality and ethical point of view, I was horrified. But also from like a Palestinian self-interested point of view, I thought, what are you guys doing in Canada and in the United States and in Europe? And then finally, though, I will say, on the other hand, and I understand, I get it, that the shock was horrible, the single worst day attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. and the shameful reactions and responses to it. But I also was horrified by the dehumanization of the entirety of the Palestinian people and the entirety of the people of Gaza. And to say everyone in Gaza is a terrorist, everyone has a hostage, everyone is part of Hamas, everyone wants to kill Jews, everyone took part in the October 7th attack. And I felt that there was just this priming of people for what was about to unfold. It was a horrible, terrible act that was going to just be a disastrous for all of us. So that's where I decided to put myself out there. I connected with hostage families. I connected with survivors of October 7th. I wanted to be a Palestinian ally from Gaza to say, I'm sorry for your suffering. I'm sorry for what happened. And I don't stand with that, while also being able to say, not everybody in Gaza obviously is Hamas. A lot of Palestinians are opposed to what happened. Let's actually be rational in how we approach I know emotions are high, but let's be rational in how we approach this operation in an effort to really ensure that maybe we can win over elements of the population and replace Hamas and have some possibility, some shot at transformation.
And now here we are, 19 plus months on, and there have been so many troughs because there haven't exactly been, you know, good periods in this 19 plus month time. There have been less intense periods, but it's just been kind of one big, long, hellish experience that just never ends. And the last few days have been among the worst. I was reading your posts on social media with great interest. I mentioned to you before we started this conversation that I live not far from the Gaza Strip, not quite on, not in what's called the Gaza envelope in Israel, where those kibbutzim were really abutting the border right up there. But I'm close enough that when the attacks were going on, the air and land attacks were going on in Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip in particular, 2 nights ago, my house shook all night. And I'm not asking for sympathy, but I didn't really sleep terribly well. And I can only imagine how horrifying it was on the other side. And we know because we have access to social media posts and we can see how people are suffering, and what's left standing is being reduced to rubble. And we now have this government in Israel, which is a very right wing government, and in which, in my view, I would call them extreme right members of Knesset hold the balance of power far beyond the number of seats they hold. But we won't get into the reasons for that. And in many ways are seen to be driving the stand and position the government's taking. But the Israeli government, to really kind of unfairly distill a lot that's gone on in the last week, there's been this huge breakthrough visit by President Trump to the Middle East. The Americans with the Qataris and the Egyptians negotiated the release of the last living American hostage, Idan Alexander, who also happens to be an IDF soldier. He was taken from his tank. He was in uniform, and they negotiated his safe return. And we know that President Trump and Steve Witkoff, the special hostage envoy, they were hoping that this, what Hamas called a goodwill gesture, they were hoping that his release would kind of be the prelude to more expansive and holistic talks. And the end game being, of course, get all the hostages out, have a ceasefire, a truce, and then the U.S. working with the Gulf nations would start to develop a plan to rebuild, and I'll use the word rehabilitate Gaza. But the idea is that at the end of it, Hamas isn't left standing. And the gut reaction of the Israeli government has been, nope, we're not doing that. We want all the hostages, and if you don't let them all out, and if you don't lay down your arms, then we're coming in. I think this new operation has been called Gideon's Chariots, and there are a lot of those chariots, and they're pounding hard. And the Israeli government's position is it's only because of military pressure that Hamas is getting pushed to want to negotiate. It's not just because of American and Qatari pressure. And I was a little surprised, to be honest, shortly before we began to speak tonight, to hear on the news that Hamas is actually coming to the table. They had initially said, no, we won't negotiate on those terms. Israel said, we won't bend to their terms. So there was this impasse. It sounds like the sides actually are prepared to negotiate again. And if so, it's hard to think that this military pounding doesn't play an important part of that.
Well, I mean, again, multiple threads happening at once. I very much so believe that, I mean, part of why Hamas, what the pounding is doing is it's killing hundreds of Palestinian civilians on a daily basis. Civilians, verifiably so. I'm sure it's killing some Hamas people. I have no doubt of that. But it's killing hundreds of civilians.
Which is horrific and tragic. And I have to say that within Israel, too, this kind of renewed stage of the war is very controversial. Very controversial. Nobody is enjoying this. The vast majority of Israelis, over 70%, and this has been consistent for the last few months, they want the hostages returned and the war to end, which means Israel withdrawing. So I just want to be very clear. No one here is celebrating. It's horrible.
Precisely. But what this is doing also is that basically the grand and vast majority of the people of Gaza, I mean, and this is going to sound harsh to you and to some of your listeners who love and care for Israel, but like we're all adults and we should have the ability to deal with tough. It's not going to be worse than what you hear on the streets of Canada. People say a lot of people in Gaza will tell you we expect nothing short of criminality from Israel, particularly this current government. We expect nothing short of them trying to ethnically cleanse us and kill us all and whatever. But what is happening with this pounding right now, the vast majority of people in Gaza are furious at Hamas. They are livid at Hamas. Hamas has no credibility left whatsoever, except in very small pockets. If you were to do real polling, not the Khalil Shkaki BS polling that the IDF itself found documents in Gaza of how Hamas manipulates all of those polls to overinstate the level of support. Hamas has no support in Gaza. It has collapsed. And so they're going into, this is my analysis and my theory, and I'm willing to stand by it through and through. They're going into negotiations not because the pounding is necessarily eliminating them or really hurt. Like the strike on the European hospital with Sinwar, because this is like just like El Deif when he was assassinated in the Mawasi humanitarian area, when all of these senior Hamas leadership were hiding among tents, and like Hamas realizes they are hoping to be able to maintain some presence in Gaza, even as a political organization, even if they demilitarize, even if they're forced to get rid of their guns and weapons, even if their military leadership is eliminated. Hamas believes that it's going to maintain its social roots to be able to respawn in the future, even if as a political entity. And I am of the belief that them entering negotiations right now is because they are seeing how the population is ready to like I've been seeing these posts on social media, and I'm actually, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to send it to my Israeli friend and have her translate it to me in Hebrew, and I'm going to do one in Arabic and in English. I'm going to do a campaign to like try to make this viral of people in Gaza at an individual level. I've been seeing people saying like, my name is so and so. I am not with Hamas. I have nothing. I surrender. I turn the like Like, I want safety for myself and my family. I have nothing to do with terrorism. Hamas is like, oh my God, we gotta like, we have to stop this somehow because our people will never ever let us be in there.
It's almost like a critical mass of dissent, like what you were saying before, there's a fear, there are brutal, regime, and people just feel that they can't and don't wanna risk speaking out. But what you're describing now is that in this chaos and mass destruction, I mean, when you got nothing to lose, you got nothing to lose, right?
Well, exactly. People are coming out with statements. The unfortunate thing is there are still enough Hamas goons with AKs and small arms that they
Right.
could still harm and kill people. Nevertheless, like the just Hamas is faltering. And I think unfortunately the death and destruction is harming the people of Gaza so horrendously is also it's also creating an untenable reality for Hamas, not because it cares about the people, but because it realizes that the people will never ever accept the group. That said, I also worry about the Israeli endgame because there is nothing like Israel is setting itself up for a trap if it goes through with this Gideon chariot to hold the territories that they capture with no alternative for who to turn it over to. I think that is a massive trap that could allow for the spawning of an insurgency that beyond Hamas. So what I have been advocating for.
I have to jump in there and say, the talk of settling Gaza, occupying Gaza indefinitely, maybe permanently, it is not going down well in Israel. Israelis do not support it. It's a disaster.
It's a trap. And it's gonna be deadly for the Palestinian people, but it's also like so this is what I've been advocating for. And I think this is a healthy note to close on. I think the pathway forward right now, we need to do it in parallel with the discussions to ensure that Hamas is not the ones with the guns, to ensure because Israel keeps talking about, okay, turn over your guns, but that vacuum, there's either going to be more terrorists or more criminal elements, and there's going to be pandemonium and chaos. You need an international and a regional security force that can not, that can basically gradually take over some parts of the areas that Israel withdraws from, like the security fence, like all along the borders, for example. You need a national Palestinian element. And that's not bringing the entirety of the Palestinian Authority over, but just elements of the PA's security forces that are professionally trained, 5 to 10,000 trained in Jordan and in Egypt, under the supervision of the U.S. through the U.S. security coordinator, the 3-star Marine general who's been stationed in Jerusalem forever. That can lead to an actual Palestinian force that can go into heavily populated Palestinian areas. And then finally, a local dimension of security. And that is what David Petraeus did in 2007 in Iraq with the surge, is standing up local militias with small arms, communications equipment under the supervision. It can be under the IDF because the IDF is way too illegitimate for the Palestinian people after all the death and destruction. Under the Palestinian Authority, you stand up all these militias that can then guard specific areas and do some of the dirty counterterrorism work to ensure that Hamas doesn't come back. They dig them out of their tunnels. They dig them out of house to house. So then with the promise that these militias then become integrated and professionalized, that's key. Professionalized and integrated into the future security apparatus for Gaza. So that's jobs, that's local know-how, local security expertise. Then that 5 to 10,000 force of the National Palestinian Authority becomes 50,000 throughout the Gaza Strip, working with the Arab force, like what the Saudis and the Emiratis did in Bahrain in 2011, or what the United States did in Bosnia or in Kosovo, and in many other examples. But so that actually is entirely achievable. And it can be, and you can inject private military contractors as part of the international and regional force that can coordinate with the Israelis. The Israelis are paranoid. And of course, I don't want a scenario where the UNIFIL example in southern Lebanon is replicated in Gaza.
Right.
Far from it.
It can't be UN. And in fact, what you're sort of sketching out here is exactly what is being talked about, what both Trump and Witkoff have been promoting, and Rubio during their visit to the Middle East this week. Exactly that. And for 19 months, we've been waiting for the Saudis, the UAE to step up and say, okay, we'll actually participate. They were always like, well, yeah, someone's got to go in there, but it's not going to be us. And it sounds like this exact vision that you're articulating is starting to take shape.
Well, this will give them the cover that there's Palestinian participation and that the United States is involved. They want the U.S. to be involved, and that they're not going to be the ones doing the heavy lifting. They'll guard strategic areas. They'll be present. They'll escort convoys, but they don't want to go into heavily populated civilian areas. And so a multi-tiered approach to security that can usher in a new and a rejuvenated, but most importantly, a reconstituted Gaza. We can't just talk about rebuilding. It has to, Gaza needs to be reimagined. I was talking to Tony Blair and he helped me, we were talking about, Gaza needs to be reconstituted, not simply rebuilt. And that's what's missing from the conversation.
But that is exactly what I was reading today that has been taking place, especially over the last few days in the Middle East. So great minds. What can I say, Ahmed?
I love it. Love it.
Let's hope that this does lead to better times, that the war stops soon, that the hostages are released, and that we can all start to rebuild and rehabilitate and reflect, because we need a bit of a lull. Wouldn't you say?
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Ahmed, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
I really could do this all day, but I'm going to let you go.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
As always, it's been one heck of a week here, as was the one before, and the one to follow surely will be. It never stops. Operation Gideon's Chariots, the IDF offensive on the Gaza Strip, continues. Global outrage over allegations of inadequate humanitarian aid continue. The leaders of Canada, the UK, and France issued a very, very harsh letter earlier this week, ripping into Israel and its conduct, and threatening harsh measures in the near future. And it is expected that Canada will recognize the state of Palestine imminently. Just yesterday, there was a delegation of diplomats. They were in Jenin, which is a city in the northern West Bank, which is also an active combat zone. They were touring with Palestinian Authority representatives, I understand, and the route had been pre-planned. The IDF is saying that the group deviated from the pre-planned route. Unfortunately, some IDF soldiers nearby shot warning shots into the air, not at the diplomats, and the IDF has since apologized. I'm working on getting additional information about that. It's awful. It shouldn't have happened, but we don't know the whole picture. Then, of course, we woke up this morning to the news that 2 Israeli staffers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. were murdered at close range, exiting an event last night in Washington, D.C. We need solutions. And I'm not saying I have the answers, but we've all got to try to figure this out.
We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.